you ever read Annie Jacobson's stuff, some of her books?
No, you were telling me about that.
I did talk to you about this yesterday. Okay, but for people out there who haven't heard of her or don't know, I talk about this a lot. My buddy Danny Jones at Concrete is reading like every word this woman's ever written, and he's like blown away by it. He's always telling me about it. I've read some of her stuff. It's pretty amazing work. But she's written about everything from Operation Paperclip post World War II to Area 51 to straight up CIA stuff to DARPA stuff. And DARPA is the one that's really interesting because DARPA that's the agency that or I don't even know if it's officially like an agency, but that's the government organization that in the mainstream you can bring up to people who like know their way around with stuff and they'll be like, wait, what is that again? And meaning it's much more in the shadows more than some of these other places like the CIA and NSA and stuff. And some of the conjecture, I'll call it that has been reported on that they're able to work on there is basically saying what I would say has been a public theory for a long time that what they have is always far ahead of what the public has.
Well, sure.
But the conjecture goes as far as saying, no, it's like 50, 60 years ahead sometimes. That I have more of trouble believing. But when we're talking about private organizations like this, that you're talking about some of these reports where it comes out and they say, well, they don't know what they're working on. I wonder if they are basically partnered with DARPA in the sense that like we see a lot of ex-CIA spies in air quotes who work for fucking Raytheon or whatever. Right. It's just it's a numerical thing on a page for them to pay their taxes. It's not like they're not still. It's just a way for the government to be able to make sure they get paid to do the job they want to do for them. So when I look at Raytheon or these other places when it comes to some of these projects, I start to wonder, is it the same thing? And then take it a step farther. If it's not something that in these public reports or the things that get pulled out of FOIA that they write that they understand, is it because it's something that's been developed in highly experimental scientific stuff behind the scenes via something like a DARPA that like, yeah, the world doesn't have a concept of it, but we have it. Like I always bring up the example when David Fravor, who gives amazing testimony on what he saw from the Nimitz with the Tic Tac, and he gives you the radar. It's really compelling stuff, and I think he's a great witness. When I see something like that, and that was in 2004, I think, when he saw it, I'm like, that feels like that could have been DARPA technology. So when I hear things like the metamaterials, my mind does go to that first, not to be like too much of a skeptic, but I'm like, is this stuff that they have physically understood and we're just not there yet? Do you ever consider that as a possibility?
Well, it's a matter of connecting the dots and doing the thought experiment and reading the reports. If you've got a Freedom of Information Act request that you have had to threaten to sue the Defense Intelligence Agency for 2 years before you finally get an answer, and then they finally come back, and there's numerous exchanges between this Anthony Bragalia guy and this the guy from the Defense Intelligence Agency. It was one person, an information officer. His name was Tominski, Stephen Tominski. And I have these. I can't put everything in the film, but everything in the film is backed up by pages and pages of reference material. So we have the letters that went back and forth over 2 years. And there's one letter that says very clearly, just to recommit before we present you with this information, you want the material related to material recovered from the Department of Defense from UFOs and studied at Bigelow Aerospace. Yes. Here's the documents. Now, you could just stop right there and say, well, what does that mean? Well, that means that the government just gave this guy reports that they specifically are admitting are what he asked for. Information about materials recovered by the U.S. Department of Defense from UFOs being studied at Bigelow Aerospace and other places. That's what they gave him. So they give him these reports. So you could just stop right there and say, well, what does that tell you? Well, that tells you that the government is acknowledging that they got this stuff from this, and it took 2 years and a lot of research to get the material. But then when you look into the actual reports, now, sure, nitinol is something that's mainstream. So is transparent aluminum. That's being studied at DARPA as an armor.
You mentioned the nitinol very quickly earlier. I can't remember if you gave the full context of what that was.
That's it's a shape-shifting, memory-retaining alloy. that basically we use it today in a lot of things. NASA's making spaceship wheels out of it. It's used in medical devices. They make stents out of it. It's basically, it's a metal that you can bend it and then just let go of it, and it'll bend back to the position it was in originally, which is exactly what's described from Roswell as this material that you could bundle up and it would come back.
Right.
And so the origin of nitinol, supposedly, from a naval weapon, a naval research laboratory back in the 60s or late 50s. In fact, the name nitinol stands for naval something, something, something. And that's where it came from, right?
Just talking in the mic, by the way. Just
so
way better.
But so not so fast about nitinol. Nitinol is a titanium alloy. And what we find is that before the Naval Weapons Research Laboratory or whoever says they invented it had it, there was a scientist at a place called Battelle Memorial Institute, which is still a huge contractor for the government, who did some of the very earliest studies on titanium alloys, and because titanium wasn't a big thing until this stuff came out of Battelle. The Battelle research went to the Naval Weapons Research Laboratory that says they invented nitinol, but it was created at Battelle. And Battelle, at the time, had a contract with Wright-Patterson Air Force Base to study materials. And so that's the thing about the film and all this evidence. You start connecting these dots. You start running out of different places to go. And then as they go and we talk about the other materials that are mentioned in the reports, may induce invisibility by reflecting or reflecting light. Now, we know that we have technology that we're studying right now that does it. We know DARPA has it. But where did it come from? And where did the idea come from? So we have these reports that are saying not this material induces invisibility. It says it may. And so these are early reports about the preliminary assessments of these materials before they got into DARPA, before they got into private industry. Then we have another one that has the interesting ability to compress electromagnetic energy. Now, they don't know how to do that. They didn't at the time. Dr. Michio Kaku comes on in the film and says, we have ways to create materials that will mimic invisibility.
Yes.
But we cannot yet do it in the optical frequencies. But in these reports, it talks about material that can do it in the optical frequencies.
What does that mean when he says that, in the optical frequencies?
Basically, the way I got it from his explanation is that, say you got something a material that if you put it under a certain kind of light could become transparent and induce invisibility. Yeah. Now, that's a spectrum frequency. It's done under artificial conditions. The optical frequency means that I could take this material and I could put it anywhere and it would render whatever invisible in the optical frequencies. So in other words, it would work anywhere. He says we can't do that yet. But these reports talk about materials that may be able to do it. And I've seen stuff that is mimicking that, like the invisibility cloak that you see on YouTube. So we're not far, and DARPA's probably already got it.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
they
but
got that shit.
The idea came from somewhere, and the government admitting these reports about these materials that may do this. Yeah, we're dealing with technology that we have now that probably came from some of this stuff. But the point of all of that is that this guy fought for this information, and when it came out, the Pentagon walked it back immediately, saying, oh, no, that's not UFO stuff. Well, then why are you telling us it is? And why can't you, to this minute, why can't you tell us what this material does? And why can't we see a sample of it? I mean, it's just like, as you follow the rabbit hole and you follow the dots that I lay out in the movie, I'm not coming to conclusions for the viewers. I'm saying, here's the evidence. It will stand up. You can ask me all day long about where I got this, what it means, where it came from, how legit is it, and I can answer all those questions. There's nothing in the movie that's not coming from factual base. And a lot of it is coming from stuff that came straight from the government in forms of freedom of information requests.
Yeah, but to your points from earlier, obviously I want to make sure I'm not misunderstanding that. Obviously there is some of the people you're talking to are giving some sort of factual cover, like with some sort of like, what's the word? Not reflecting. Why can't I think of that? This always happens. Something about listening to these headphones and hearing yourself back. Sometimes you can't think of the right word. That's the one
deflection.
thing. Yes.
Yeah, Chris Mellon says that to me. He says, no, it's not in the film, but right after that, he said, and maybe this is a deflection, but there are people in Congress that are allowed to answer this question. And I'm like, well, Chris, you're talking about the Gang of Eight. The 8 members of Congress that are supposed to be able to get to everything. But if you can't get to everything, how can they get to everything?
And you're a Mellon.
Yeah.
You're a member of the Mellon family.
Yeah, and the former Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence for under 2 administrations. Okay, and so to be able to, I'm not going to say to be able to back him into a corner, but be able to ask him an extremely pointed question that I might mention he will not answer now to anyone, and get him to give me a good answer. It was because I was working with History Channel at the time to help them promote that show Unidentified, where the TTSA guys all came up and had a whole show.
I don't think I saw that.